Hey all, thank you for joining today. We're going to give it a second or two before we get started. Okay, I would like to get us started. So thanks everyone for joining and watching the 5th seminar of FISH 513, Cultivating Inclusive Conservation Practices. I really appreciate all of you who are showing up to watch this live. I know it's been quite the week. I would like to thank the university and the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences, in addition to the Campus Sustainability Fund, for making this seminar possible. Additionally, I'd like to specifically thank the Burke Museum Ichthyology Excellence Fund for assisting with this seminar in particular. If you are interested in following along with the readings, they are posted on the class website that's linked in the video description below. And just as a note to folks, I'll be adding closed captions to these videos later on, so you will be able to access those. I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. I would also like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Duwamish people, who are the first people of Seattle. It has been a superbly stressful week for everyone, and I recognize that this stress has just piled on top of us in an already challenging series of months. So as such, I would like to, again, share some joy and hope today in my reflection. As many of you know, this week was the US election, and while I'm not going to go in to saying any more on the presidential race, I did want to highlight some exciting news for representation of Indigenous peoples. So this week, there was a record number of Native American women elected to serve in Congress. While they are not the first Native American women to be elected to Congress, that actually was only just in 2018, this election cycle saw 2 of those women that are incumbent retained for another term, in addition to the election of a 3rd Congresswoman of Native descent. So these folks come from the Laguna Pueblo, the Ho-Chunk, and Cherokee nations. And while there have been a handful of Indigenous men that served in Congress, this election has seen the most Indigenous and Women-X representation that has occurred yet to date. It was also accompanied by 18 Indigenous Women-X peoples in the congressional races, which is the largest percentage since records of this kind started being kept since 2004. So for both men and women, that now means there are 6 Indigenous candidates who won their elections this cycle. And while this is not me necessarily saying anything about the US government and the system in which these folks will serve, or that this proportion of representation is adequate, it is always an improvement when elected officials better reflect the population of the US. And I hope that with increasing Indigenous perspectives, that we can have productive and meaningful policies introduced. So with that, I would like to move to introduce our speaker this week. Khavin Debbs is an educator here in Seattle. Khavin was born and raised in Sacramento, California, and it was there that he cultivated his love for being outside and experiencing nature. He attended Sacramento City College, where he first started his career in early childhood education. He then worked at Mustard Seed School, an emergency school for homeless children. There he taught 1st through 4th grade and received his Montessori teaching credential. In 2013, he relocated to Seattle, where he taught at a Montessori preschool and finished his BA from the Evergreen State College and his MAED from Antioch University. He is currently working on a doctorate in educational and professional practice. He co-founded a consulting business called Ujima Collective in order to not only talk to organizations about anti-racism, but also to give BIPOC professionals the opportunity and resources to become consultants. He's also an artist and photographer and enjoys soccer, basketball, music, mycology, rock climbing, and hanging with his cat, Kakashi, in his spare time. So with that, I would like to welcome Khavin and let you take it away.
All right. Well, hello, and thank you for everyone who is tuning in. Thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, given the circumstances and everything that's been going on. It's nice to do something that I think generally makes me a little bit happy, a lot of it happy, and something that I'm passionate about, and I think just kind of ties into everything that's going on. So my plan is to talk as less as possible, and then open up the rest of the time to questions and have conversation, because I feel like that's how we're best able to not only absorb new ideas, but to really, talk about them and see how they can be actionable. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump into my presentation. Start a little bit ahead there. All right. So this presentation is actually based on my master's thesis, which I entitled #Nature So White, liberating outdoor spaces for people of color. And the reason I called it Nature So White was a few years back. I think some of y'all may remember the Oscars So White hashtag that was going around, and it was really calling out the hypocrisy of the Academy and representation in movies and in film. And to me, I felt that a lot of times the same type of thing happens in outdoor spaces, or what we consider the great outdoors or nature. And I just wanted to, because I thought about my experiences and why it felt like I never saw very many people of color in those spaces with me growing up. So yeah, that's really what got me interested in the topic. And when I eventually went to Evergreen and to Antioch, I was able to really delve into that and do some research and put some facts and things behind what I was already kind of thinking. And there were a lot of things that I learned as well. So it was really great. I am the partnerships manager at Tiny Trees Preschool. Tiny Trees is an outdoor preschool that's located. We have multiple locations around King County. We're as far north as Carkeek Park, so we contract with local parks. So we're as far north as Carkeek Park in the Greenwood neighborhood, and we're as far south as 5 Mile Lake Park, which is in Auburn. So that's me as a little kid. So growing up, I grew up in the 90s, and I grew up during a time where you went outside and you played and you didn't come back in until later. And, it's so funny to think about those times as so different. But I think most of us who were born in the early to mid 80s, really do, and in the 90s, some people in the 90s really do remember a lot of time pre-internet, screen in your pocket type of situation where, if you said you were going to be somewhere, you just had to take it on faith that the person was going to be there. You weren't texting like we do now, like every 20 seconds about where we are, right? And so it's just interesting to see how much times have changed and how ideas around being outside have changed. So here's me and my best friend. We're actually still best friends to this day, a little bit older. And this was my first year at a sleepaway summer camp. So my parents would send me to these summer camps for like a week at a time. And, we'd go on hikes and we'd go swimming and canoeing. And I got really good at archery randomly. And, one of the things that I found that was interesting, though, was that, the two of us, Cameron and I, we were the two children of color that were at that camp. And we're talking over 100 kids. And so even in that space and even being that young, that's something that I held on to and that I remembered. And I think I had a really good time at that camp. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I saw a deer for the first time. I was 8, like freaked me out, but I was really excited at the same time. I was able to be there and exist and have a good time, but also wonder, like, why are we the only two people that look like us yet again, right? How come, like, the camp counselors, none of them are Black or brown folks? Like, what is that all about, right? So, like I said, this is going to be not only a presentation that's, where y'all are going to be able to ask questions and I can answer them. But I also want it to be a space of reflection. So what I want y'all to do is just maybe take a minute or two and just think to yourself, like, what are some of your earliest memories or experiences with outdoor spaces? They don't, positive, negative, indifferent, any kind of, like some of your earliest or first interactions with outdoor spaces. So maybe just take about 2 minutes and think about that. And then we'll come back and move on. Okay, about 1 more minute. Okay. So hopefully you were able to, yeah, have some thoughts about your earliest memories and experiences with the outdoors. Who was there? What you were doing? How did that? How do those experiences, or how does that experience inform your relationship with being outside now? I think whenever we're doing this type of work, it's really important to have that self-reflection. I feel like any of the truths or understandings that I've come to in the past few years have come from self-reflection. So I really do like to incorporate that into everything. So yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the program that I started at Tiny Trees called DTO, or we were calling it RDTO. Initially, we called it Decolonizing the Outdoors, and the idea was to, change narratives around experiences outside, particularly for families of color, and help meet people where they're at. Right? Not everybody is comfortable enrolling their child at Tiny Trees, for example, and then on top of that, people just have their own ideas about being outside. Some of it is cultural, some of it is their own experiences, and we pass those experiences on to our children and to the rest of our families, just like they were passed to us, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. But so we offer things on weekends, are in the afternoons, so that people have the opportunity to show up. You don't need to be enrolled at Tiny Trees in order to participate. Everyone is welcome. We particularly work with organizations that are serving families of color, because that is our primary aim. We want to change the ideas around what it means to exist outside. So these two pictures that you see here, the one on the left is a nighttime scavenger hunt that we did for a STEM night with the Renton Innovation Zone partnership. And we made these little night lights. Well, my coworker made the little night lights, and they were really great. And we hid a bunch of cones and leaves and sticks, and like in a huge like lawn area. and the families and the kids were able to use those to find the things in the scavenger hunt, and it was really fun. The event on the right was with the Danny Wu Community Garden, which is in the International District in Seattle. My coworker Jeer planned a scavenger hunt with a lot of the plants, and so the kids were able to pick, harvest their own plants, and then everyone came together and made stone soup, and it was a really, really fun event. We had about 50 or 60 people show up all together. So those are some of the type of things that we do. This is the picture on the left is the RDTO or part of the RDTO team. This was a bike giveaway event that we did with Bikeworks in Columbia City, and we were able to give away about 30 bikes and helmets to children and their families that live in the Beacon Hill area. And one of my favorite stories from this is that one family was leaving with a bike and a helmet, and there was another family on the playground, and that family was like, "Hey, I really like your bike." And the first family was like, "Hey, they're giving away bikes right around the corner. Go over and see if there are any left." And so that family came over, and we were able to give them a bike and a helmet too. So really just trying to invest in community and in the spaces that we are, I think is a really, really thoughtful way in thinking about how to change ideas and narratives about being outside. And we got generally really positive feedback from this event and previous events. And so as long as we continue to use the feedback that we get, I think we're going to continue to do some really great stuff. We haven't been perfect. Our first event that we tried to do, nobody showed up. And I think there was a lot of learning that came from that for us in how to do things differently. So what's the issue? What's the problem here, right? What I kind of settled on as like a sentence was that people of color historically have not been well represented in outdoor spaces. And when I talk about outdoor spaces, I'm thinking, in this particular context, I'm thinking about, your wild outdoor spaces, so spaces that you would go hike in or that you would go climbing in. Now, I think if you were outside, you are in nature. That is my personal belief, and that's a belief that I generally try to spread to other people, because I think that the idea of nature has kind of been co-opted to think, the great outdoors, and that's not necessarily fair, because there are so many people that do so many really cool things in outdoor spaces, and just because they're not out amongst the trees doesn't mean that it's any less important. So that being said, a lot of the representation that I will be talking about in this presentation does pertain to the greater outdoors, but I generally do like to have a bigger conversation about what nature is and who gets access to it, and what have you. So I'll get into some of that moving forward, but just know that that is a much bigger part of what I'm studying or what I look at. So why, how do we get here, right? So one of the reasons is epigenetics. One is another is intergenerational trauma or transmissions, and the other is lack of representation. And lack of representation can often lead to narratives, right? So epigenetics, it's all over the place, right? It's what you eat, it's where you live, the people you interact with, when you sleep, how you exercise, even all the age, all of those things can eventually cause chemical modifications around the genes that will turn those genes on or off over time. And that's a very scientific definition, but it's the idea that, the way that we live our life does affect our chemical makeup, right? If you're in a highly stressful environment all the time, that is going to change you over time. If you are in a space where you have certain experiences about being outside or being in nature, that's really going to inform how you move and how you act, and how, if you even want to be in outdoor spaces over time, right? And I think that a lot of that is linked to a lot of the transgenerational transmissions, right? So these are things that we're taught or learned, from our families, from our parents, right? So they're the stories that our families tell us about the past, but they stay with us as we move into the future, right? My father was he worked for the railroad for, 40 years almost. And so his life, his work was outside, right? He spent days at a time in the Sierra Nevadas in the snow and Klamath Falls and Oregon, uh, working on freight trains. So when he came home, he wasn't trying to go outside, because for him, outside was work. And being that technically my father is my grandfather, he's been doing this, he had been doing that work since the 60s and experienced a lot of racism as a result. And so that affected his ideas and his experiences with outdoor spaces, and he passed those things on to me. Now, I think that we both kind of have an adventurous side, which is what gets us outside. But I will say that a lot of his stories and a lot of the things that he warned me about, those things stay with me when I go to certain places, right? My partner and I went to a yurt in rural Washington for my birthday a couple of months ago, and everywhere that we went, there were Trump signs all over the place. Now, regardless of your political leanings, for a Black person in a space like that with a bunch of Trump signs, it's just not very comfortable, right? And when I was in those spaces, it really did force me to recall some of the things that my dad was saying about being careful and being mindful of where you are. And those are definitely things that if I ever have children, I will pass those things down to my children. So I know a lot of times, a lot of Black folks, have varied experiences with the outdoor space. Now, I can only speak as a Black man because that's who I am, right? But I also know that a lot of people within the Black community do have a lot of narratives around being outside, particularly when it comes to doing things like hiking or climbing or camping or, really spending extended periods of time in those types of spaces. So though I think that's another reason. There's a lot of history that leads to that. If you think about, if you think about slavery, you think about being forced to work outside. That negative connotation can be passed down from, it is passed down from generations to generations. There have been studies about epigenetics and transgenerational transmissions when it comes to the Holocaust, and I feel like it's not the same, but I think there's a lot of there's enough similarity there to be able to say that, yeah, there's a lot of things that have been passed down, and I think some of that stuff is starting to play out, but or starting to go out, but it's still very much present in a lot of spaces. So the other thing before we do this, and we're not going to jump there quite yet. So actually, I'm going to jump back here for a second, but I do want to talk a little bit about narratives and representation, because I also think that's important. I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit, but this is downtown Seattle. I used to, before COVID happened, I worked in Pioneer Square, so I spent a lot of time walking around, and there are a lot of outdoorsy kind of stores in the middle of downtown Seattle. So I took a couple of pictures just to kind of see, who were they advertising to, right? And a lot of the places had some semblance of this type of advertising. Now, when I see this as a Black person, and I continuously see this on a different websites, when I go to look for clothes or I go to look for whatever gear that I need, I don't see a lot of people that look like me. And I think that when I see that in advertising, people like to act like advertising doesn't matter, but it does. And when I see a bunch of white people in the same positions over and over and over again over time, that tells you this isn't a space for you, right? Representation is very, very important. This is one of the pages at Prana, and again, you're starting to see a lot of similar images. This is one for Eddie Bauer. I just, I could click forever and see a lot of the same stuff. Now, there are some places who have started to, use people of color in their advertising, which I think is a good start. I think the next step is to, share those stories and do it as authentically as possible when they're doing advertising and things like that. So yeah, that so representation is just super duper important. Anytime we're talking about being in outdoor spaces, and when we're working with children, you know I try to do as much as possible to show them that everybody belongs in these spaces, and they're welcome to be there, whenever they want to go. um Another thing that I mentioned too is just not skipping steps. And what I mean by that is like really just meeting people where they are. Again, not everybody has the excitement about going out hiking that we might, right? We know a lot of us tend to know the neurobiological advantages of being outside. We know that it's important. We know that it's good for us, right? And getting other people to be at that same spot is it takes time, right? So I always say if it means that you're working with someone and it starts with them just being like, hey, figure out what kind of tree is outside the place that you live. Figure out how long the library in your community has been around, right? Just doing those small little things in people's, smaller microsystems will really help, and it'll help them expand and want to learn more about the world around them until they get to a point to where they may feel more comfortable doing something bigger. And that was one of the biggest problems with our first event, is we tried to have a hiking event for our first event, and again, not everybody's comfortable with that. It also rained really hard the night before, but I think we jumped the gun a little bit with thinking that everyone was just going to want to go on a hike for the very first thing that we did. So yeah, I think there was a lot of learning there. I just want to make sure we pointed that out. So this next part, I know we don't really have time to go outside. Normally when I give this presentation, we're able to go outside. But what I want you to do is take another 2 or 3 minutes and just take the perspective of anything that's not human. So, whatever is around you. It could be a plant, it could be a building outside of your window, it could be a mushroom that you see, it could be a blade of grass, it could be a picture, it could be your bed, anything that's in your view right now. I want you to pick it, and then I want you to think about what it would be like to be that thing. So for example, there's a picture behind me, right? And if I was choosing to use that picture, I would think about, what am I able to see within the apartment? How long have I been there? Do I know that I'm a picture of a flower, or do I not know that I'm a picture of a flower? Are there other pictures next to me? Do I remember the other pictures, right? What is my frame? What does my frame look like? Um, any kind of questions you would ask about being, whatever object that you choose. So if you're a building, how long have you been there? What have you seen go up and come down? If you're a tree, same types of questions, right? Do your roots intertangle with other trees? Are you a tree by yourself? Like, think about just take the perspective of whatever you choose for about 2 minutes. So yeah, go ahead and take some time to do that, and then we'll come back. I'll close out, and then if you have any questions or comments, I think there will be a little bit of time for that. About one more minute. Okay. Now, I don't know, maybe you're wondering why I had you do that. And usually, we're in a space where we're able to share our perspectives. Um, but the reason that I tend to do that is because I feel like if you can take the perspective, like if you can practice taking the perspective of an inanimate object or something that's not human, um, you can practice doing that with other people. Um, Got to understand that taking someone else's perspective or thinking about what it might feel like to be in that situation or try to gain some empathy is important, while also understanding that you will never be that person, right? Will I ever be the tree that I took the perspective of? Of course not, right? Um, I think the great difference and the great thing is that, like, we can have conversations with people, we can talk, we can learn, we can observe, we can listen, right? Um, and I think it's really important that when we're doing any kind of work with people, especially when we're talking about trying to change narratives and ideas, it's important to understand where people are coming from as much as we can. And one of the best ways we can do that is by listening, observing, and talking with people. Uh, so yeah, I like to do that as a little bit of a reminder. Um, so yeah, so once we've gained that new perspective, we might be thinking like, what do we do now? Right? When we're moving forward, when we're working with organizations, when we're working with children, when we're working with whoever we are around the environment and being outside. Um, First thing, does your space or wherever you are, does it have images that present counter narratives about being outside? Right? Um, Number two, be prepared to get uncomfortable. Doing this work for reals means that it's going to be hard, and there are going to be things that you get defensive about, and there are going to be things that make you uncomfortable. If that's not happening, you're not doing the work. Um, Understanding that it takes time and that it's not going to happen overnight, um, and taking it one day at a time, and understanding that you're not going to see monumental change um, in a short period of time. These things take practice, they take work, if you're doing them the correct way. When you're thinking about your outdoor activities, ask, who is this excluding, right? That's a really quick, easy way of figuring out, like, how inclusive am I actually being? Is this something that we can do? Do your research. Just do some research around um, new ideas, because as a person of color, I got to tell you, when people come up to me and they want me to explain everything to them, sometimes I have the energy for that. Sometimes I don't. A lot of the times I don't. It just gets really tiring. Google is free. Um, yeah, do your research. Understand that you're gonna fuck up. That is a real thing. It's not, you might mess up, you might make mistakes, you are going to make mistakes, but that's how we learn. So when you make a mistake, own that you made a mistake and keep it pushing, right? Learn, try not to do it again the next time, and let's go, right? We got work to do, right? Work with communities, ask them what their barriers are, and listen. Use this information for co-creation, not just what you think is a good idea. I don't think that needs too much more explanation. That's pretty much what it is. Respect the spirit of the place that you're at. Learn the indigenous history of spaces that you're inhabiting. I loved the land acknowledgement in the very beginning because, you know, as much as land acknowledgements, you know, are becoming the custom, I think it's also important to set that space aside and understand where you are. And last but definitely not least, whatever you're doing, you need to get your staff or yourself into anti-racism training as soon as humanly possible. If you've done it already, review what you've done, share it with the people that you work with. The reason being is that it's going to teach you how to see how race and really plays into a lot of bias that we have in this country around a lot of different things. And when you're able to do that, then you're going to be able to, you're going to gain a new perspective, right? You're going to be able to put yourself in a better position to be more thoughtful about the work that you're doing. So yeah, honestly, I probably should have put that at the very top, but I would say get yourself into, or your staff or whoever you're working with, into anti-racism training as soon as humanly possible. I have plenty of resources. I do this training myself. So if anyone is interested, then that can be a thing that happens. But I highly recommend anti-racism training. I think that is it for me talking wise. I appreciate everyone listening to me gab for a while here, but I wanted to take the space and take the time and open it up for people to ask questions. So if that is something that's possible, then that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. It was a really powerful talk. And thank you for sharing those insights. For folks that are watching via YouTube, you should feel free to type in the YouTube live chat if you've got questions, and I can start us off since there's a little bit of a delay. So one of the things that I, really think is important and why I invited you as a seminar speaker is because I think in science and in, larger organizations, we generally sort of forget that kids are stakeholders and have an investment in what we're doing, right? Since we're all concerned with sort of these natural spaces. So I was curious if you can kind of talk about the idea of, why you see it as so important to make sure, children, BIPOC children, all children feel comfortable in these spaces for future down the road sorts of pathways that they might take.
Sure, absolutely. One thing I like to say is that when we teach kids to care, they grow up to become adults who care, right? So I think it's really important to start early because we can build positive experiences and positive relationships to the outdoors so that, number one, they're not foreign spaces. It's not an idea that you have to come to as an adult. I have a lot of friends who have their own ideas about what it means to be outside and did not have the same type of childhood that I had, where I was outside all of the time. And so when we do go outside and we do outdoorsy things and they realize that it's actually pretty fun, they're like, man, I wish I would have been doing this sooner, right? And so I think it's really important for me, especially with BIPOC children, to show them that, like, hey, these are spaces for you too. You're allowed to be here. You're allowed to flourish. You're allowed to thrive, and you're allowed to learn here, right? I think our environment provides the best classroom, and I get to see that on a daily basis at my job. I get to see how these children are interacting with their space, how the environment changes with the seasons, right? And when you're able to have that type of beginning, you may not turn into, Davy Crockett or, or John Muir or Matthew Henson or something like that. But I think it will give you a little bit more of a framework for what it means to be in those spaces. And once you're able to do that, I think it's easier to become an advocate for those spaces. I used to use the word stewardship, but I don't know, stewardship kind of denotes ownership, and I don't really like that. But I think communion and harmony are words that I like to use. And once you feel that sense of belonging in that space, you want to protect it. You want to make sure that it sustains. We're not going to be here forever, as much as we may like to. We're not going to be here forever. We have our lifetimes, and then we're gone. So, if we can leave the future in good hands and better hands, then we might have a shot at, maybe not only reversing some of the things that we've done environmentally that have harmed the planet, but we can relate to each other better. And I think that's one of the most important things, is being able to relate to each other.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really great answer for that. We've got a few questions in the YouTube live chat. So one question is thanking you for your presentation, saying really cool work. I was wondering if you could expand about intergenerational trauma, but from a healing standpoint, are there healing practices you and your organization focus on?
Sure. I think a lot of the healing comes from having the experiences, having the positive experiences outside. And the way that we get to that space is really just trying to listen to people and understand like what their hesitations are around being outside, right? So for example, I've had families say straight up, like, I work outside. I don't want my kid going to school outside. Like, I work really hard so they don't have to be outside. And so I think reframing it to say things like, listen, we're not expecting your kid to like be full time at Tiny Trees, but a couple of hours on a Saturday at a park is going to be a good time, right? So I think a lot of the healing comes from that. I think another way that we've tried is really coming to grips with a lot of the practices that we were perpetuating at Tiny Trees that were rooted in white supremacy, and really, really undoing that, and admitting first and foremost, of how the organization was founded, how we were operating, and how we are trying to work to change those things. Acknowledging the harm done to people that have worked there, to children that have gone through, to teachers past and present. I think that is the type of, it's the type of restorative justice that like needs to happen. And I don't want to co-opt that term, but I think that it's that reconciliation, or it's that admitting of how the organization was founded, and really, really actually working to change those practices. Because I think what ends up happening is people take the training and then they're excited about it, but then when it comes to making really uncomfortable, hard decisions, then they go right back into the same habits that they went into before. So I think that initial acknowledgement of how organizations are founded, or the practices that they do that are rooted in white supremacy, I think that really does affect the healing process. All of our teachers, we all came together, and, people were crying and people were angry, but at the end of it, the people who weren't with it found something else to do, and the people that were with it came along, and we're able to move forward in a way that feels a lot more authentic and leads towards that healing when we are having conversations with people about their experiences outside. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. And I think you could probably give an entire other talk about how to do that in a productive way with organizations. So
yeah, that's another talk.
Yeah, exactly. But that, little plug, if anybody wants to hear Khavin talk about that, you should get in touch with him for sure. We've got another question. Thanking you for your presentation. And then, do you have any advice for BIPOC hikers concerned about an increased potential for negative experiences in the outdoors due to the current political climate?
Yeah, for sure. Number one, if you can help not going alone, don't go alone. I know that solo hikes are great and they're very therapeutic and I love them. And if you are not familiar with the lay of the land, if you're going someplace for the first or even second time, I would say just try not to go alone. Let as many people know where you're going, and like the name of the trailhead, when you expect to be back, all of those types of things. Just really just set yourself up so that people know where you're going to be. And then on top of that, I would just say, go during the day. Just, it's getting darker quicker. And I would always suggest just making sure that you're doing things while the sun is out if you can help it. I know sometimes you end up getting caught and it gets dark at 4:30 these days, but yeah, I actually have a Facebook group called Sankofa Outdoors, and it is specifically for BIPOC who are going out into nature or want to just talk about nature or little things in front of their house, whatever it is. But there have been times where we've used that group even as just kind of like, hey, y'all, I just want you to know I'm going to be here at this point, and this is how long I'm going to be there, and this is when I'm going to be back. So I think those are kind of like those are probably my primary tips. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And also for any white viewers who are watching, thinking about the exercise earlier, thinking of something else that's non-human, I think it's probably good to reflect on why white viewers may have never had to ask themselves that question before. Mm-hmm. And then I think we'll end up with one last question here from the live chat before we go to the one-on-one discussion with the students. But are there partners you work with, thinking of scientists specifically, but whomever you might want to highlight, who model meaningful community engagement? So the status quo is really a one and done outreach effort versus have you had some more of those meaningful interactions?
Yeah, so I think some of our partners that we've had a lot of success with are, first of all, most of them are Seattle based because that's where we're based. So Families of Color Seattle is one organization that we've worked with quite a bit and have done some really great stuff. We did a family hike with them at Carkeek Park. It was a lot of fun. We went and found a geocache in a park, and there were about 40 or 50 people that showed up. So that was a lot of fun. I talked about the Danny Wu Community Garden. They do a lot of great community outreach, particularly within the International District. So that's an organization that we've worked with. Let's see. The Wilderness Society is another one that we've worked with quite a bit. They partner with Sound Transit to do Trailhead Direct, and that's a program that shuttles folks from light rail stations directly to trailheads and back again. So we've been able to work with them, and they've been really, really awesome to work with, and they are definitely community minded. For more resources, I would say there's an organization called E3 Washington, and they basically get together networks of environmental education organizations all over the state. So yeah, if you just give E3 Washington a Google search, they'll give you an entire list of folks. But those are the ones that right off the top of my head. We've Tiny Trees has also worked with the University of Washington to do some studies. We've done a sleep study with the effects of being outside. We also did a study at the very beginning to see if our kids got any more or less sick than children who were in indoor classrooms. And the study found that our kids don't get any more or less sick. So it's about the same rates. So from a scientific standpoint, that's something that we've done. But yeah, I would say visit E3. And then if you have any more, if you want to talk a little bit more, you can, reach me, or we can have more conversations. But yeah, that's right off the top of my head, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you, everybody who's watching on YouTube and the great questions that we had today. We're going to end the live portion and go to the class discussion, but thanks all for tuning in. We'll have future seminars, so make sure to stay tuned and hang in there for the end of the week. Thanks.